Nobody warned the morning staff about Vera Ingram. That was how she wanted it. Welcome back to Quiet Badge's Stories. I'm glad you found this one, because this story got me. Before we go any further, hit like if these stories mean something to you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. I mean it. That part always makes me smile. Now, let me tell you about a man who was 4 days away from disappearing forever, and the quiet woman on the night shift who heard the only word that mattered. Nobody at Harborfield VA Medical Center talked much about the man in room 7B. That was how it had settled. 14 months was a long time to hold on to someone who gave no sign of holding on himself. Staff Sergeant Troy Cavett, Army Ranger, 3rd Deployment, 7 years of service, had been airlifted out of the Panjshir Valley with a traumatic brain injury so severe that 2 surgeons at Bagram had not expected him to survive the flight. He survived the flight. He survived 3 surgeries. He survived the move stateside, the weeks in the trauma unit, the long weeks after that. What he had not done, according to Dr. Glenn Renard's most recent chart notation, was come back. Persistent vegetative state. That was the language in the file. 2.5 pages of imaging reports and clinical observations, and the quiet professional vocabulary doctors used when they meant gone. Renard had a measured way of delivering this conclusion. He was 51, careful with his consonants, neat in his white coat. He never raised his voice, he didn't need to. The certainty in his tone did the work for him. When Delia Cavett had stood in the hallway 3 weeks earlier with her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee and asked whether Troy might ever recognize her again, Renard had looked at her the way men look at windows during rain. Not unkindly, simply from a distance. "Mrs. Cavett," he said, "we should begin discussing long-term placement options." Vera Ingram had been standing 6 feet away at the medication cart. She kept her eyes on the labels. She had been at Harborfield 9 months, night shift, mostly. She wore bright blue scrubs that were slightly too large on her lean frame and kept her dark hair in a bun that was always 1 hour past needing redoing. The day nurses knew her as quiet, thorough, good at IVs on difficult sticks, not much for conversation. What the day nurses did not know was that Vera Ingram, at 39 years old, had once been Staff Sergeant Vera Ingram of the 7th Special Forces Group, attached to a joint task force that did not appear on any public record. She had been an 18 Delta, a Special Forces medical sergeant, for 11 years before a torn rotator cuff and something harder to name, had ended her contract and deposited her into the civilian world like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples were still moving. She had not stopped moving with them. Her call sign had been Anchor. She had not heard anyone use it in 3 years. She thought about that the afternoon she first noticed Troy Cavett's eyes track the window. It was a Monday. 4:30, shift change coming, the last pale light of November falling across the bed. She had come in to reposition him. Standard, pressure injury prevention every 2 hours. And when she moved to his left side, his gaze shifted. Not much, a degree or 2, enough. She checked the chart. No notation of visual tracking. She watched him for another 90 seconds. His eyes held the rectangle of light the window threw against the wall. Then they moved again, following a cloud shadow crossing the glass. She wrote it down. The day-charge nurse, a woman named Brenda, read Vera's note with the expression of someone decoding a mildly inconvenient text message. "He responds to light," Brenda said. "That can happen in PVS, it's not purposeful tracking." This looked purposeful. "Vera, he's been cleared 3 times. Renard reviewed the most recent imaging himself." "I know what the imaging says." Brenda looked at her over the chart. "I'll pass it along," she said, which both of them understood to mean, "I will not." Vera went back to work. She thought about it the way she used to think about things in the field. Not obsessively, not loudly. Just a frequency she kept open in the back of her mind while she did everything else. A channel she never fully closed. She had learned to do that in places where missing something small got people killed. 2 nights later, she was alone with Troy at 11:40 p.m. The ward had gone quiet in the particular way of hospitals after midnight, when the building seemed to exhale. She was changing his IV line when she heard it. Not a word, not even close to a word. Just a rasp, barely air, like a man trying to clear his throat from the wrong direction. She went still. She leaned in. The sound came again. This time there was shape to it, a consonant at the front, a vowel that collapsed before it finished. Then he said it. Nenker. Vera did not move for 3 full seconds. Her hand stayed on the IV line, her eyes stayed on his face. That word, that specific word, did not exist in any file at Harborfield VA Medical Center. It did not exist in any public database. It belonged to a list of operational call signs from a mission designated Operation Cold Shelf, a high-altitude extraction in the Panjshir Valley that the Department of Defense had quietly classified and quietly filed, and quietly hoped nobody would ever need to explain to a congressional oversight committee. Troy Cavett had been Pilgrim. He had been the radio voice during Cold Shelf. He had kept comms alive for 6 hours with a concussion and 2 cracked ribs while his team held a mountain ridgeline against a situation that kept getting worse. He had called in Vera's hoist insertion over a frequency that crackled with altitude and interference, and he had said her call sign steadily and methodically across those 6 hours, like a man reciting a prayer he believed in. She had never met him in person. She had seen him once briefly at the extract point in the dark. But he knew her name. Vera leaned down until she was close enough to see the texture of his eyelashes. "Pilgrim," she said. His eyes filled. Not the glassy overflow of a brain that couldn't regulate its responses. Something else. Something deliberate and wrecked and unmistakably present. Vera straightened. She took one slow breath. Then she pulled out her notepad and wrote 3 words at the top of a fresh page. "He is here." What happened next was not smooth. Nothing about it was smooth. She requested a consult from Dr. Adisa Nwosu, the attending on trauma neurology rotation. Nwosu was 36, unhurried, and seemed to genuinely read whatever was handed to him. He reviewed her notes, the eye tracking, the auditory startle responses she had documented over 9 nights, the one vocalization. And he looked at her across the nurses' station with a slightly tilted head. "Renard cleared him," Nwosu said. "Renard cleared his imaging. Imaging doesn't ask him questions." Nwosu was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant statement." "I know what I heard." "You're saying his diagnosis may be wrong." "I'm saying his diagnosis was never tested the right way. Locked-in syndrome can look identical to PVS on imaging if the imaging is taken at the wrong phase of recovery. The behaviors I've documented are inconsistent with PVS." Nwosu looked at the notepad again, then he said, "I'll come see him." When Renard found out, he appeared at Vera's elbow at 7 the next morning, before she had collected her things to leave. "Nurse Ingram," his voice stayed very level, "you submitted a consult request without informing the primary team." "I submitted it through the proper channel." "The proper channel is to communicate with me first." "I communicated with the charge nurse. It went unaddressed." Renard folded his hands in front of him the way people folded napkins at formal dinners. "Patient. Controlled. I have been managing this patient for 14 months. I am familiar with his presentation." "He said a word last night." A pause. "Vocalizations occur in PVS, they are not." "He said a specific word, a word that means something." Renard's eyes narrowed just slightly. "What word?" Vera looked at him. "A word from a classified operation." The quality of the silence that followed was different from the silence before it. "You have a military background," Renard said slowly. "I do." "That's not in your file. Parts of my service record aren't available through standard channels." Another pause, longer. "I see." He unclenched his hands. "I'm going to recommend you be temporarily reassigned from this patient to protect the therapeutic environment." Vera's voice stayed flat. "You can put that in writing." "I will." She walked out of the ward before he could say anything else. In the stairwell, she pressed her back against the wall and counted to 4. In, hold, out, hold, again, the old rhythm. The one she had used on ledges and in cargo bays and in moments when the situation had gotten ahead of her instincts. She thought about Troy's eyes. She went back in. Nwosu had already seen Troy by the time Renard reached him. Vera knew because she found Nwosu in the hallway outside 7B, with a look on his face she recognized from emergency bays, the look of a person recalibrating. "He tracked my light," Nwosu said quietly, consistently, left to right, then back. "PVS patients don't do that." "No," Nwosu said, "they don't." It was Nwosu who ordered the updated functional MRI. It was Nwosu who requested the speech pathology evaluation and the full sensory assessment, and it was Nwosu who, at 9:15 the following morning, showed Vera the preliminary scan results in a conference room with the blinds half down. There was activity, deep, suppressed, fragmented, but there. Preserved pathways the original imaging had categorized as inactive. Inflammatory response patterns consistent with blast-induced neural suppression, not cellular death. "He's not gone," Nwosu said. "No," Vera said, "he's not." Renard is going to push back hard. "Let him." Nwosu looked at her for a moment. "What exactly is your background?" Vera kept her eyes on the scan, medical. He waited. "Special Forces medical," she said, 11 years. "I've seen blast TBI in the field. I know what it looks like when someone is trapped inside a brain that everyone else has already written off." Nwosu was quiet. "Then Renard has a transfer order waiting. Pinehurst long-term care, it's scheduled for Thursday." "That's 4 days." "Yes." "Then we work fast." What Vera didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that the transfer to Pinehurst was not standard procedure. Pinehurst Long-Term Care ran a clinical research wing with an arrangement with a medical device company called NeuroBridge Systems. NeuroBridge was developing a non-invasive brain-computer interface. They needed subjects. Documented as non-communicative, who had strong military histories, whose cases would generate public sympathy and therefore funding, and who could not speak for themselves to object. Troy Cavett, on paper, was exactly what they were looking for. Dr. Glenn Renard had been a NeuroBridge consultant for 2 years. He had filed that disclosure with a private ethics board. He had never told Harborfield. The night before the transfer, Vera sat with Troy for 3 hours. She had been officially reassigned. The paperwork had come through at 4 p.m. She had read it, folded it, put it in her locker, and come back to 7B anyway. The night charge nurse, a man named Clifford who had been on the unit 22 years, and held his opinions loosely, looked at her when she walked past the station, and then looked at his screen and said nothing. She pulled a chair to Troy's bedside. "I'm not supposed to be here," she said. "You probably figured that out." His eyes found her face, steady, alert in the way a man is alert when he has been awake and waiting for a very long time. "They're moving you Thursday," she said. "I'm trying to stop it, Nwosu's trying, we don't have much." Troy's mouth moved, no sound, but Vera had been watching his mouth for 9 nights. She reached for the letterboard she had laminated and brought from home. "Slow," she said, "we have time." His eyes moved left, then right. She tracked the grid. I. She waited. S. A. C. Isaac. Vera's chest tightened. She kept her hand still and her voice even. "Isaac Bowen," she said. "He was your spotter." Troy's eyes moved. Y-E-S. She remembered Isaac Bowen the way she remembered a handful of people from that part of her life. Not clearly, not warmly, but with the specific weight of someone you lost before you got to know them well enough. He had been 26. Funny in the dark and efficient in daylight. He had died at the extract point when a secondary device detonated during the casualty load. Vera had been inside the aircraft, in the middle of stabilizing Troy, when she felt the blast rock the frame. When the dust cleared, Isaac wasn't there anymore. She had spent 3 years trying to decide if she had called the loading order wrong. Troy's eyes were moving again. S-A-I-D. Said. H-E. He said. W-A-S-N-T-A. Wasn't afraid. She could not make herself speak. T-O-L-D-M-E. Told me. F-I-N-D-A-N-C-H-O-R. Find anchor. T-E-L-L-H-E-R. Tell her. N-O-T-H-E-R-F-A-U-L. Not her fault. The letterboard slipped from Vera's hands. She caught it before it hit the floor. She held it in her lap and felt something come loose in her chest that had been locked there for 3 years. Not grief, because grief she knew how to carry. Something older. Something she had been building a wall around and calling professionalism and calling forward momentum and calling the job. Troy's eyes were on her, patient, certain. Not her fault. Vera lowered her forehead to the edge of his bed rail. She stayed there for a long time. When she lifted her head, her eyes were wet and she didn't try to hide it. "He was in the second load," she said. "I made the call. I chose who went first." Troy's eyes moved once. "No. I was the medic on site. It was my decision." His eyes moved again, harder. "No." Then he spelled slowly, with the effort of a man pushing weight uphill. H-I-S. His. H-E-S-T-A-Y-E-D. He stayed. Then V-O-L. Volunteer. "He chose to stay," Vera said. The words came out barely above a whisper. "One slow blink, yes. He told you to find me. One blink. And you've been holding that for 14 months. One blink." Vera set the letterboard on the bed and put her hand near Troy's right hand. Not gripping, just present. The way she had learned you could make contact with someone who couldn't move without taking something from them. "I've got it now," she said. "I've got it." The monitor beeped, steady, unchanged. Outside in the hallway, the ward went about its quiet midnight business. At 6:15 the next morning, Major Denise Okafor arrived at Harborfield. She was Army Medical Corps, assigned to a joint Veterans Advocacy Liaison office that most people at Harborfield had never needed to interact with. She walked through the main entrance with a single folder, and the kind of purposeful quiet that made desk staff straighten without knowing why. Nwosu had called her 2 days earlier. Vera hadn't known about the call until Okafor introduced herself outside 7B, looked Vera over once and said, "I heard you were attached to Cold Shelf." Vera said, "That file is classified." Okafor said, "Parts of it were cleared last year. Medical relevance provision." She opened the folder. Renard filed a Neurobridge consulting disclosure with a private ethics board, not Harborfield's. He never told this hospital. That's a conflict of interest on a patient he directly managed. The transfer is paused as of this morning. Okafor's expression was measured. There's more. Neurobridge has been recruiting non-communicative veteran subjects from 6 VA facilities over the past 2 years. 3 of those subjects recovered enough to give statements. Renard was the referring physician in 2 cases. Vera said nothing. The corridor felt very still. He needed Troy to stay where he was, Okafor said. A classified veteran, decorated, publicly compelling. Neurobridge would have had their funding and their headline. Vera thought about Troy's eyes tracking the window on that Monday afternoon. She thought about 14 months of silence that wasn't silence. "Where is Renard now?" she asked. "He resigned at 6 a.m. this morning," Okafor said, before anyone could formally suspend him. A pause. Apparently quiet is his preferred exit too. Troy Cavett received targeted anti-inflammatory treatment over the following 3 weeks. A protocol designed for blast pattern neural suppression with preserved pathway activity, developed from research that no one had thought to apply to his case because no one had believed his case required it. In the 2nd week, he moved his right thumb. In the 3rd week, he answered a yes or no question from the speech therapist with a soft, rough, unmistakable sound that everyone in the room agreed was the word yes. Delia was there. She had to sit down. Vera was not in the room. She was at the nurse's station working through documentation she had put off for 3 days. She heard the sound from down the hall. Not words, just the particular sound a person makes when they get back something they had already buried. And she stopped writing and looked at the wall for a moment, and then went back to the paperwork. Later, Delia found her in the hallway. "He keeps asking for you," Delia said. Her voice had the unsteadiness of someone who had recently cried and hadn't fully come down from it. "He can't say much yet, but the therapist figured out it's a word. He keeps saying it." Vera waited. "Anchor," Delia said. "He keeps saying anchor." Vera closed her eyes for 1 second. "Tell him I'll come by tonight," she said. Delia looked at her with the expression of someone trying to read a map in a language they don't speak. "Who are you?" she asked. Not accusatory, just genuinely lost. Vera thought about it. "Someone he found in the dark," she said. "Someone who found him back." Harborfield changed its intake protocol for TBI patients in the months that followed. Every veteran admitted with a disorder of consciousness now received a mandatory 2nd neurological review, using an updated awareness assessment before any permanent prognosis was entered into the record. The program had a name, assigned by the nursing staff without anyone asking permission from administration. They called it the Pilgrim Review. The Neurobridge investigation widened. Renard's licensing case moved through its process. 3 other veterans were re-evaluated at facilities where he had held consulting arrangements. 2 improved with correct treatment. 1 of them eventually went home. Vera Ingram stayed on the night shift, still in blue scrubs a size too large, still with the bun that needed redoing, still not saying much to people who didn't need to know. One morning in February, Troy Cavett walked the length of the rehab hallway with a walker, Delia on his left side, a physical therapist on his right. At the end of the hall, Vera was standing near the window with her arms folded and her eyes on the floor, the way she stood when she was pretending she wasn't watching. Troy stopped. He looked at her. His voice was still rough, still working its way back to itself, but it carried. "Anchor," he said. Vera looked up. "Still here," she said. He nodded once, the nod of a man who had spent 14 months waiting to confirm that, and who had known. In the part of him that remembered cold mountain air and radio static and a voice that answered every time he called, that he already knew the answer. Major Okafor had left Vera a sealed note before returning to her office. Vera opened it the same night she heard Troy say her name with a voice that sounded like his own. The note had 4 lines. The first was Isaac Bowen's service number, the second was his date of death. The third was a line added to his official record after a review Vera had not known occurred. Subject remained at extract point voluntarily to provide cover for withdrawal. Decision was his own. The 4th line was from Okafor. He already told Troy. Now you know too. Stop carrying weight that was never yours. Vera read it twice in the stairwell with the door propped open, the February cold coming in off the parking lot. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her scrubs pocket, over her heart, and went back to work. She never promised anyone they would recover. That was not a promise she could keep. She promised the things she could keep. That she would check, that she would document, that she would stand in the doorway when someone needed a doorway stood in, that she would not decide the story was over just because it was easier to stop reading. Troy Cavett did not call himself healed. Vera Ingram did not call herself a hero. But in a ward that had once confused silence for absence, they had worked out something worth knowing. The kind of thing that didn't fit on a chart but showed up anyway in how the nurses moved through the hallways. A little more slowly, a little more carefully, leaning in to listen. Not finished. Never finished. Not until you ask.